What's going on, Imperials? Pokémon seem to take pride in dividing their fanbase. Although it's almost purely for monetary reasons, Pokémon games generally come out in pairs, forcing you to choose a side. Most of the time that decision falls to what's on the cover, but there can be some unintended consequences for your selection. Each game has certain sets of alternating version-exclusive Pokémon that cannot be found anywhere else, which can be a huge bummer if you're trying to catch them all. So, here are the top 6 best and worst pairs of version-exclusive Pokémon, excluding the mascot legendaries. Number 6 worst, Whimsicott and Lilligant. Version exclusives should entice you further to buy the game, or at least give you something to brag about to your friends. But with these two, I didn't really want either one of them. Truthfully, for the entirety of Gen 5, I could not tell you the difference in these Pokémon. This bunch and Maractus, I would always get confused if I remembered them at all. Can somebody please explain to me why the most grass types ever were introduced in the region based on New York City? And being nondescript two-stagers that both evolve using a Sunstone only made it harder to tell the difference. Not until they added the Fairy type to one of them could I finally have something to distinguish them. Instead of exciting me, these grass types just seemed more of a burden to try and get any of them, requiring me to take up far too much space in my PC. Number 6 best, Clauncher and Skrelp. Even though Gen 6 was fancy and new, we didn't get a lot of new Pokémon, so they had to be smart about which ones they would divide up. But I think they found a suitable pair in Clauncher and Skrelp. The fact that they were both two-stage water dwellers made it a fitting choice, since many version exclusives are mirror images of sorts, so you don't really have to miss out. But we should establish what being good version exclusives mean. To me, a good pair of version exclusives should provide a legitimate dilemma on which game you want. If I'm questioning which version to get just because of a few Pokémon that are exclusive to one, then I feel that they've done their job. And that was the case in Generation 6. I got Y version because Xerneas wasn't as cool looking to me. However, Clawitzer, on the other hand, was quite enticing. The only problem was that it was an X version. Skrelp was nice, and it turns into a dragon after all, and I even have a shiny one. But there was just something about these powerful pistol shrimp. If Barbaracle hadn't been there to save me, I likely would have found a way to be disappointed by not having either one of these water-type Pokémon from which to choose, which makes the version choice all the more difficult. Number 5 worst, Lotad and Seedot. There's nothing inherently wrong with either of these two, the problem is just that things are a bit lopsided. You see, I actually like Seedot better than Lotad, but in the next two stages that preference changes. So personal bias alone makes Ludicolo better in my opinion. But just look at it from a gameplay perspective. One of them acts as a potential replacement for 2 of the starters, freeing up some hypothetical team space. The other is the same combination as another Pokémon later in the game, except that one doesn't require an evolutionary stone. I don't mind Shiftry at all, but when you tell me that I can't have one in favor of the more versatile option, I'm not really going to miss him. Number 5 best, Alolan Ice types. Oh, no, not that ugly guy. We're talking about Alolan forms. Regional variants are one of my favorite features to ever come to a Pokémon game, and they had better stick around for a while. So it made sense that they would take advantage of this shiny new mechanic and segment some of them into version exclusives. Alolan Vulpix and Alolan Sandshrew were revealed in the initial trailer for regional variants, along with their evolved forms, which had some people wondering if all Alolan forms would be ice types. But since these pairs were now somewhat similar, they did the classic maneuver and split them up. Truthfully, I wasn't as torn with this one, since Ninetales is probably my new all-time favorite fairy type. I'm just glad that it was in the right version that I had picked so I could use one on my team. But despite Sandslash's terrible weaknesses, I really like it too. It has a great look. Each of these are solid redesigns, and I can easily see why these ones were given priority over some of the others. Although I am surprised that they didn't split them up a bit more. They easily could have done the same for Alolan Rattata and Meowth, but I suppose that just makes these frosty critters that much more special. And the fact that they both evolved with an Ice Stone... No, I said Ice Stone, not Rock. An item that definitely needs to see more use in the future, solidifies their connections enough to make them an excellent pair to give you a quality Ice type no matter which game you end up choosing. Number 4 worst, Slurpuff and Aromatisse. I don't really have too much to say about these two. It's pretty much the opposite of Clawitzer and Dragalge. Whereas I was torn between that choice, these two made me want to avoid both games. With the introduction of the Fairy type, they needed more than just the old converts. So they nearly doubled the numbers with brand new fairies in Kalos. Except it kinda seems like the developers were only told a few hours before the deadline because it looks like they were running out of ideas. I've laid out my problems with Aromatisse before, and Slurpuff isn't too much better. If it weren't for Belly Drum, nobody would even care about it. And the worst part about these two-stage pure fairy types is probably that they each have their own unique evolutionary items. Because if there's one thing we didn't need more of, it's one-off items to crowd up the bag. Would a Fairy Stone have killed them? Anyway, these Pokemon somehow accomplish being outlandish yet bland at the same time. So I'd pass them both up if I could. Number 4 best, Electabuzz and Magmar. These two Gen 1 Pokemon have always been lumped together. Whether it was intentional from the start, or they just realized that they were both nondescript embodiments of elemental forces, they've been partnered up ever since. When the baby boom hit Johto, they were side by side. And when Sinnoh went crazy with extra evolutions, these two were represented once again, with a similar pair of unique evolutionary items. But back in Generation 1, these elemental beasts were version exclusive. Most pairs of this nature were mainly a cosmetic difference so that you wouldn't be cut off from something important. But these two really marked an occasion where if you didn't pick a certain version, you would miss out. If you wanted a strong and pretty cool electric-type dude, but picked the wrong version, you were out of luck. If for some reason you wanted a problematic amalgamation of leftover body parts set ablaze, there was nothing quite like it in the other version. But my favorite part of these two is how they kept it going. Way back when, the DS could play its games and older Game Boy Advance games. And the cool part was how they could make them interact. This of course directly influenced the PAL Park feature, the Transfer Pokémon, but if you had an older Pokémon game simply in the Game Boy slot, it would affect Pokémon that could appear on certain routes on the DS. Pokémon that wouldn't be in the game by any other means would appear this way, and wouldn't you know it, Magby and Elekid were exclusive to their own versions then too. These Pokémon are clearly devoted to their craft of being exclusive counterparts to one another. And honestly, I'm kinda surprised that they didn't get Megas together just to keep the trend going. Number 3 worst, Celesteela and Kartana. I'll be honest, Ultra Beasts aren't really my thing, but some of them are pretty cool, like Celesteela. Too bad I got Sun version. Even just looking at it on paper, Kartana is much worse. Grass and Steel versus Flying and Steel? Celesteela quad resists Grass, while being able to fire back with neutral Flying against Kartana's non-existent special defense. And that's not even mentioning the 4 times effective fire attacks that Celesteela has access to. The lesson here is that just because some Pokemon share types, does not in any way mean that they're equal. Number 3 best, the Sinnoh Fossils. If the Order of Antiquity has taught us anything, it's that I love me some fossil Pokemon. And to make them more rare, you've always had to pick between them. Like the starters, this really makes you think about your choice. And in Gen 4, we could dig for fossils and other various items in the underground. I spent quite a bit of time down there mining evolution stones, and finally came upon a skull fossil. This was very cool, but now I needed an armor fossil as well, mostly because I liked Shieldon more. And I dug, and lo and behold, for some reason, they decided to make them version exclusive. This made me incredibly sad at the time, Instead of choosing which one you wanted in-game, you've already made your choice upon purchase. But I've since grown to appreciate this setup. Ironically, due to their exclusivity, they seem to bear more importance in the opposite game. Both families of fossils are represented in the gyms of the region. So when you come across a strong trainer with this Pokémon that you've never seen and can never obtain, it makes you stop and take notice. Every other game has the fossils as a choice by the player, giving you the potential to have any of them. And even in these games you can dig up all the other fossils after the national dex, regardless of the version. Do these Pokémon hate each other that much? Was there some kind of huge war between them a long time ago to wipe out the other one? And who won depends on which universe you're in? I don't know, but these reanimated dinosaurs make a powerful pair, and I'm just a little sorry that the choice between them was taken away from me. Number 2 worst, Gligar and Delibird. Johto had a somewhat limited roster to deal with, so they decided to split up some of their mini one-offs. One such case was Gligar and Delibird. Couldn't tell you why. Other than being single-stage flying types, they have nothing in common. One is a fearsome aerial scorpion, and the other is the cheapest mall Santa they could find. The consolation prize for missing out on the first flying type ever to be immune to electricity is getting to use the move Present over and over until you accidentally heal your opponent. And what's worse is in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, when they kept the old divides, but added in Gliscor, meaning that there was another, even cooler Pokémon for half of the fanbase to take advantage of, with no semblance of even trying to make it up to the rest. Number 2 best, Zangoose and Seviper. Up until this point, most of the pairs have been jolly old chums that simply decided they wanted to share the workload. But these Pokémon are mortal enemies. They hate each other so much that the developers had to put them in separate games to ensure that Hoenn didn't become a bloodbath. What I said last time about a war is almost certainly true here. I don't know who started this feud, or even whose side I should be on, because they're both so cool. Seviper is the first purely snake Pokémon since Gen 1, and I think it's pulled off even better here. If the fangs weren't enough, it's got a giant poisonous blade for a tail. And Zangoose is clearly the Pokémon version of Wolverine, so how much cooler can you get? What I extra love about this one is the Horde battles in Gen 6. When you encounter a horde of Zangoose or Seviper, depending on your version, sometimes there's a chance for the other one to appear in one of the slots. And if they do, they will be attacked by all of the other Pokémon on the field. It was pretty annoying when I actually wanted to catch the more rare one, but the fact that no other Horde battles have this only furthers the insatiable rivalry of these exclusives, which I found to be hilarious. Zangoose and Seviper are both solid Pokémon to be paired off against, and not only makes the version dilemma more difficult, but entertaining to boot. Number 1 worst, Mandibuzz and Braviary. There's about no other pair in Pokémon that so perfectly encapsulate opposing sides of when it comes to my personal preference. Braviary is one of my all-time favorite Pokémon. How it so nobly represents valor and other positive attributes, while also being a respectable ambassador for my nation. The other is just some kind of perturbed nanny. And while I know that some people appreciate Mandibuzz for its good defenses and use for competitive, I don't ever play competitive, so that's not enough for me. Even just judging by their pre-evolutions, you can easily tell which one is cooler. Just ask yourself, would I rather side with a proud warrior spirit, or a literal scavenger that can't wait to pick your bones? Truthfully, I have never been so glad that I couldn't get a Pokémon in a game. Number 1 best, Scyther and Pinsir. Of all the types at the dawn of Pokémon, Bug might have gotten the worst rap. We were relentlessly inundated with them in the early game, and while you could easily have a fully evolved Pokémon by the first gym, their stats seemed to match, being quickly outclassed by anything else. But there were two bug Pokemon near the end of the decks that saved this type, and that's Scyther and Pinsir. These insects are far more imposing than any of their brethren, looking like some kind of nightmare. They could easily be either giant dinosaur bugs, or something out of a horror movie, in a good way. I love how they each have their own equally deadly signature weapons, and how one is kind of bulky on the land, while the other is agile in the air. They simply strike a balance of being similar enough that you can see the pairing, but truly unique in their own ways. I personally prefer Scyther, but Pinsir does not make the choice an easy one. Once Johto rolled around, they tried to upset this balance somewhat by giving Scyther an evolution, and by bringing in Heracross. While Heracross is my favorite bug type, I don't appreciate that they suddenly decided Pinsir would be better off with him. I guess just because they're both beetles? But nothing will separate the inherent connection that these first-gen bugs had in being monstrously cool, ferocious killing machines that just happened to be limited to one per game. So, those are the best and worst pairs of version exclusives in Pokémon. Which Pokémon pairs are your favorites? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!